vibe.powerapps.com is still in preview, but did you know you can get the same experience using the Code Apps plugin? Let's dive into that a little bit more and explore it. Charles, what is the Code Apps plugin?
Sounds impressive, doesn't it? So the Code Apps plugin is very similar to the Canvas app plugin that we showed last week. But I guess the Code Apps plugin is sort of simpler, I suppose, because the Canvas app plugin had tool calls and it had like a prerequisite of having .NET SDK installed and things like that. The Code Apps plugin is basically just a set of skills, but it's created in quite a clever way.
So we can use this plugin. It's a collection of skills effectively, and it's going to create a code app for us. Is that how it works? Is there more to it?
It's more about guiding the agent so that it can understand how code apps works. So agents already understand things like React. They have so much knowledge and data on that, but they don't have a clue about code apps because they were trained before code apps even came into play. So what this plugin is doing is it's telling the agent how to scaffold a code app. So basically how to build a code app, how to connect to different data sources within a code app, how to actually deploy it into Power Apps. And then it's also keeping a memory of things because you don't want it to get confused and not know what data sources it's added and all of that kind of stuff.
So we're giving our agent a brain and we're making it an expert in code apps with this plugin. It sounds quite interesting, actually. So how do I get it and how does it work?
So guessing it is pretty simple. You go through to the documentation, you put a couple of commands into your terminal, and that's it. You're up and running. So just like with the Canvas app one, but with less prerequisites. So basically you need, at the moment, Claude Code or GitHub Copilot CLI, and then you're doing it through your terminal. But it's very easy to get up and running and very fun to use, to be honest. The skill is basically a set of Markdown instruction files, as it says here. So it's telling it like what Code Apps is about, giving it the step-by-step way to work through different things. So it's making sure that it checks certain things are important to check. There are safety guardrails that you wouldn't have otherwise. So things like making sure that you don't have a direct API call in your code app because you're supposed to be using connectors instead. And then the memory bank is just a useful additional feature so that it can keep an eye on what is actually going on and remember things. So there's the quick start. That's how you get it installed. The prerequisites are here. So it's the usual things that you've got for a code app that you have as a prerequisite. So Pack CLI is required for this at the moment. I can imagine in the future they'll move over to the NPX CLI, but you'll probably want the Pack CLI installed anyway because it's just such a useful tool.
And that's great. So prerequisites, we know what we need to do. I can see there as well the technology stack. For us, it feels very familiar by this point. It's building React. It's building with Vite, TypeScript, using the Pack CLI, Dataverse, and Power Platform connectors. So very familiar for us, but it's going to give everything that you need to get up and running, bundled up in these Markdown files, and you're off to the races.
So then as far as the architecture is concerned, it's put everything into nice folders and it's created some skills, but it's just basically loads of Markdown files that tell it what to do. So I guess the things that we might want to pay attention to are that there's an agent persona for architecture decisions. So that helps it to architect the solution. And then you've got things like shared instructions, you've got connector references, you've got your memory bank that we were talking about, development standards, so how should you do versioning and things like that. And then you've got all of your different skills. Most of them are just about adding data sources, so adding those connectors. And then, of course, with a plugin, you'll have your manifest. That's a usual thing. You don't have to worry about that. That's basically just some metadata about it. And yeah, I mean, this same kind of stuff going through all of this. You've got your / commands, things like create code app. So obviously that means you're going to create a code app. So when you're wanting to start completely from scratch, that's the skill that you invoke. So in your terminal, you type in / create -code -app, and then it will ask you some questions. So it'll ask you things like, what do you want to build? Do you want it in light mode or dark mode? It will ask you those kinds of things. And the other interesting thing about the Code Apps plugin is that Microsoft have decided to tell it which agents, which models to use for the different skills. And we'll get into that. But I just wanted to show that it's basically just a load of skills, and like skills can invoke other skills in case you didn't know. So the create code app skill will invoke add Dataverse if it needs to add Dataverse, and so on and so forth. So it's pretty simple, I would say.
And I guess if you're getting started with code apps and you're not sure where to start, some of this might seem overly complex, but in essence, you just need to run the commands at the point that it tells you to run them and answer the questions, and it's going to then get going for you. So, this is more if you're interested about what's happening under the hood, but you don't necessarily need to know what's going on. But it is definitely advantageous to know what's going on. So, yeah, what do we do from here?
So just have a quick look at the skills and commands. So we talked about create code app for when you're creating one from scratch. You've got deploy, so where you're going to deploy it actually to send it into Power Platform so that you can play it or your users can play it. And as I said before, it's telling it which models to use. So Opus for creating the code app where it really needs to think deeply. Where it's deploying it, it still needs quite a decent amount of intelligence to understand that, but not as much in depth. If it's just listing connections, it doesn't need any intelligence at all for something like that. It's just calling out, like, give me all of the connections, and then it will spit them out. So Microsoft have gone through this, deciding which model makes the most sense for which call, which basically just takes that burden off of you. So you don't need to think about these things as you're trying to build it if you weren't using the plugin.
That's really interesting, and it's something that I've been a massive advocate of for a while now, is around model management. So it's good to see it make its way into this plugin.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you were really cost conscious, you could always take this plugin, create your own version of it, and then use different models if you wanted to scale it down to make it cheaper. Because it is, even though it's doing that, it is still very hungry for tokens because there's a lot that it's doing. As you can see from creating a code app here, all of the different workflow steps. So it starts off looking at the memory bank, seeing if it exists, and then it will write to the memory bank as it's going through doing everything. So it will check for prerequisites, making sure that you have everything installed that you need to have installed. And it will go through all of these steps and invoking the skills that it needs as it goes through them. But basically, what you can do is if you do / create code app and you tell it what kind of app you want to create, it can do everything to take you through to having an app that's actually built with Dataverse tables that you can use straight away once that's done.
That's really powerful, isn't it? Being able to do that. And you can see here it's doing a lot of steps to get to that point. So really interesting. You can see the workflow steps there on the screen, and there's a lot going on. And as part of those details, particularly with the Create Code app, you can see how detailed it gets as part of that. And even if you're using AI without this plugin, you'd probably find that some of these steps would get missed, or some best practice doesn't get kind of followed or adhered to. So this takes a lot of the guesswork and a lot of the stress out of it, particularly when creating the code app.
Yeah, as a simple example, you might create your code app, but not have one of the requirements. Maybe you have an older version of Node.js and it causes an issue. Well, this is going to check that that's not going to cause an issue before it starts going through all of the other things. So then we talked about the fact that you also have a deploy skill. So that's obviously got less steps, but it's still doing things. Like it's still doing the memory bank section. It's still building, it's deploying, and then it's updating the memory. So it's updating the memory to say which version of the app has been deployed, which is nice that it's keeping track of that. And then we've got things like list connections, which we talked about before. It's just really getting a list of all the different connections. And by doing that, it then knows which connection it can add.
Yeah. And then we see things like the add data source router skill that tells the AI what actually needs done. So, to add Dataverse. So if you want to do that, it's going to then route to the Dataverse skill. Nothing overly onerous, but really useful and just more efficient.
Yeah. So rather than having to go to the documentation and then figure out, oh, what's the commands that I have to do for this particular data source, this knows it. So it will choose the right data source. And if it doesn't have a skill for that data source, then it will just default to add connector and it will do the best that it can do with that.
This is interesting, isn't it? In that it's the connector first principle, meaning that rather than trying to do direct API calls, it's going to say, don't do that. Use a connector instead. This is how we do it in Power Platform. And I like that.
Yeah, it's really nice because, of course, content security policy is turned on by default. So if you try and make that fetch call, if you try and access an API, it's not going to work. So it's fantastic that it's telling it you have to use a connector. And the other side to that as well, and I can't actually remember whether this plugin does this yet. I think it doesn't do it yet. but the Canvas app plugin will actually go and look at what connectors you're allowed to use. So what do you actually have access to? What are not blocked by your DLP policy or your data policy? If this doesn't do it yet, I can imagine it will do it in the future. So you might be saying to your agent that I want to connect to my Google Drive because I want to upload files. And then it will come back to you saying, you can't do that in your current environment. You're not allowed to. So then it would probably suggest, well, why don't you use OneDrive instead? Yeah, it'll be very clever in that sense. If you were doing things like using Fetch or Axios, then you're basically opening up your code app to the outside world. So that's a scary thing. If we're using connectors, we're protecting it. So one of the things that this plugin does for you, which you wouldn't guess if you didn't use the plugin, is that it has guardrails and standards. So these aren't development standards like a naming convention or anything like that, but we'll get to that. The guardrails is really nice because what it means is that before you're deploying it and before you're installing different things, it's going to check with you that that is allowed. So that's really important. It's also telling it, like, if you're going to change something outside of my project directory, confirm with me first, because that can be very dangerous. But also, it must not deploy without a successful build, which is really important. Must not edit generated files. Now, this is something that if you don't have the plugin, your LLM might decide, I'm just going to change that file because I'm working on your files for you, right? Well, this will tell it, don't change those files because they're generated, and that's not a good thing to do. And things like installing different packages. Well, packages can come with viruses. They can come with rogue code or bad code. So you do really want to know what packages you're installing. So this will confirm it with you first. So yeah, really important things there, as well as the prompt injection defense. So it basically with this, it's treating things like ignore previous instructions as literal data, and then it's reporting that suspicious content to the user. So it's not going to be completely foolproof, but it's definitely going to help you to protect you from things.
Yeah, I really like this. It almost acts as that control framework, doesn't it, for code apps with this set of, you must do this or don't do that. It's really nice to see, and it should help particularly people that are knowledgeable or have the experience of coding stay on the right path and not do anything maliciously, which I really like. So it makes it a bit more accessible to the masses rather than people having to kind of fumble their way through the AI and just kind of trusting it blindly.
Yeah, it takes it that step closer to the vibe.parapps experience where you're completely protected. So with this, it's still pro code, but there are some protections around it now if you use this plugin. So I think it's a no-brainer to use the plugin. So I mentioned the development standards before, and I said that it's not going to do things like naming conventions. This is what it actually does. So I found this an interesting decision. Always display the version in the app user interface. I'm not sure I'm so happy with that kind of thing, because what it will want to do then is it will want to put the version front and center. Maybe you just want it in the footer or something like that. So yeah, that's a bit of an interesting one. The other one that's quite interesting is default to dark theme, which I think a lot of organizations won't want a dark theme as their default.
Definitely not as an internal app. No, I think that would vary, by organization. Great to have the option, but yeah, by default, maybe not so much. So Microsoft, if you're listening, maybe put that to light mode first with the option for dark theming.
It's the same kind of thing as with the Canvas app one where it was saying to it be bold and prefer dark colors, that kind of thing. Build and deploy is an important one because sometimes you might do pat code push and forget to do npm run build. So running the build, basically, it builds everything to not only then have everything ready before you push it, but will also spit out any errors if there are errors. So you always need to build before you push, and that is in here. So that's really good. So then the thing that I wasn't expecting to be in the plugin is a memory bank system. So like this is the hot topic with AI, isn't it? Is how do they keep their memory? And Microsoft have gone and built something for it with code apps, which is quite cool. So the memory bank system, as it's working on different things, it will be storing things in this memory bank Markdown file. And the things that it's going to store, you can see a list of it there. But we also have an example here, which I think is quite cool. So it's saying what the app is, which environment it's in, what version we've got, when this file was last updated, which is really important. But also we've got things like what completed steps are there. So every agent, before it does something, it comes and reads this file, and then it understands, oh, we've already added that Dataverse table. Or maybe we were planning to add that Dataverse table, but it didn't get done, that kind of thing. And then it, of course, shows the data sources. So this is something that LLMs will really struggle with if you don't have the plugin, is they won't necessarily know to go and look in specific places for the data sources and understand them. So this tells them what's going on. And then the last action that happened, if you need to resume your session, maybe it got stopped for some reason, maybe Anthropic's Claude service was down, like it has been quite a lot recently. And then also the next step. So consider add Teams or add Office 365. So yeah, pretty cool feature.
I wonder how that's going to work long term, though. If you've been developing a large app, will it hit a limit? Will it start to slow down? I'm curious to test that further in my kind of exploration with plugins.
Yeah, my gut feeling is that it's not going to be an issue. Because I think most people aren't going to reach the levels where it would be an issue. But yeah, it will be interesting. I think the point with all of this is that we're at a particular stage, aren't we, with code apps and with AI coding models, where they're changing so rapidly that we can't really plan too far ahead, can we? So maybe this is going to be just completely replaced in 6 months' time with something completely different. That could happen. So I think this is a great way to start off with things. And I definitely think that this is a positive.
Definitely.
So then, of course, what we're always talking about, Josh, is that we're always talking about the fact that planning is so important. So there is this planning policy under the guardrails and standards. And the planning policy is that before doing any kind of major change, you have to go into plan mode. And that's great because let's say that you're not using the plugin, you might start working on something and it's a major change, but you haven't really thought about the fact that it's a major change and you didn't really plan it. You just started prompting. Well, this is what's there to help you with those kinds of situations. So then you've got planning for things like adding new features, adding components, etc. And then what's planning not required for? Well, things like just a minor bug fix and some single line fixes, like it says there, or maybe we're updating the memory bank. You don't need to plan for that. So yeah, the next bit is to do with error handling, which is quite an interesting one because it's something that I hadn't considered the plugin would be adding, which is basically that if some kind of error happens that this is listing, that you don't want your AI to continue trying to fix it, because it might get stuck in a loop and consume tons of tokens and you get nowhere. And that does happen. So it's really important not to do that. So we've got things like if there's, say, an error with installing a module and it can't find the module, well, it's not going to keep trying to install it. It's just going to stop. Another one, like if it can't find a connection, it's not going to go off and try and debug it itself. It's going to stop and it's going to ask you to run your list connections and then find that valid connection ID. So it's basically protection for you against consuming too many tokens and wasting too much time.
Yeah, it's nice to see. And I can imagine our viewers must be at their screens now saying, show us the output, show us what's going on. I want to see what this can produce. And we'll get there. We're getting there. We're nearly there, promise. Last thing to point out is plugin version checks, in that when you use this plugin, it's always going to check just to make sure that you're using the most up-to-date version, you're current, you're good to go before it does any of this. And that's just one less thing to worry about, isn't it?
Yeah, that's really important because things are just changing so quickly, aren't they?
Exactly. So let's show our viewers what it can do, right?
Yeah, so the plugin is not just a code app plugin, but it's also doing things with Dataverse. So I asked it to build me a delivery management app and it built me tables for it. I guess the thing that we want to bear in mind for something like this is that this table that it built me, it didn't put it into a solution. And the code app that it built for me, it didn't put into a solution. I wasn't happy about that. And I think that that's something that they need to address as quickly as possible, because that will stop me from using the plugin because I need everything to be in a solution by default. However, this is what it built. So Josh, what do you think of it?
I think it looks good, actually. First impressions are quite good from my point of view. I'm not overwhelmed. Usually when I see some of these vibe apps and some of the code apps stuff, I get really overwhelmed really quickly. But that's actually quite nice, I think. Obviously, there's things I would maybe look to change, maybe some contrasting or just maybe some slight tweaks. But for a first pass, I think it's pretty good. But what do you think, Charles?
I was pleasantly surprised with this. So I asked it to build a delivery manager app for recording deliveries that come into an office or a building, something along those lines. It asked me questions. It came back to me and it said, well, do you want this? Do you want that? It asked me quite a few questions, which was very good. And for those questions, I basically just said, go ahead with whatever you think is appropriate, because I didn't really care about the output. But if you're working on a proper app, you would, of course, answer those questions properly. You would probably also get your brand guidelines or some kind of documentation on your design, and you'd feed that through, and you wouldn't get this white and blue app that I've got here. So you'd get something that makes more sense. Functionality wise, I've played around with it a little bit and it works perfectly. I couldn't find any bugs. I asked it to implement a light and dark mode just to see what would happen. And I am, pleasantly surprised. And we talked about the version number thing. And yeah, you can see that's front and center up there. I would prefer that to be in a footer and kind of hidden away a bit. And you would only go and view it if you need it. It doesn't need to be that prominent. But yeah, generally it's a good app and I'm pretty happy.
For very little effort and work, I think the plugins produced a really good result. And yeah, if you need more specificity around what you're actually doing with your brand guidelines and that, it'd be interesting to see. Maybe we should do one using the Power Squared brand guidelines and see what happens. But yeah, I'm impressed. I think it's good and a step in the right direction. Certainly feels more cohesive compared to the Vibe.PowerApp stuff that I've been playing with recently. So I'm happy with that. And I hope they bring this plugin into that, because I think it needs some of that at the minute just to bring it up to spec, really.
Yeah, so my takeaways for this would be that you can build this in exactly the same way as building a Vibe.PowerApps app, in that you just give it a prompt and you answer some questions and then it builds it for you. So it means that it's just as simple as that, providing that you get the prerequisites sorted out. For the actual app that it's produced, it's so far, in my experience, it has less bugs than Vibe Apps has, but it's not putting it in a solution. So I think, and the plugin is in preview. So I think that it's something that's worthwhile experimenting with, but I'm not going to be using it on something I'm planning to take into production. At the moment, I am just experimenting with it.
Yeah, I think this is where these things are still falling short from my point of view. None of this stuff is getting put in the solution, and it's something that we've been calling out time and time again. I'd love to see the ability to add all of this stuff into solution ASAP, because it's going to be the main blocker from being able to use any of this stuff in a production environment and enterprise, because no one works outside solutions these days. So again, Microsoft, if you're listening, please put this in, because it's going to make this so much more, useful. I guess the final thing to say is, have you used the plugin yet? What did you think of it? Any comments? Let us know. We'd be happy to hear, happy to have a discussion on it. Again, if you like this video as well, do give us a like. If you've not subscribed already, please subscribe. It means a lot to us. And we'll see you on the next one.